Hello and welcome once again to the Fair Game podcast. We love you football. I'm Graham Miller, and in this episode, we'll be focusing on one of the hottest topics in football in 2023. Probably in every other season as well, come to that. It's the role of the referee and the behaviour of the players on the pitch. Now, some say it's all part of the spectacle and adds to the excitement and drama. Others say it's ruining the game and both issues need immediate reform. Well, to talk us through it all, I'm joined by the former top international referee Keith Hackett, the former general manager of the Professional Game Match Officials Limited, and also Niall Couper, who's the CEO of Fair Game, which means he can bring us up to date with all the Fair Game news before I blow the whistle to start our conversation. Niall.
Thanks, Graham. So the big thing for us is coming up on Monday when we have our panel looking at the future of football at Birkbeck in central London. On the panel are some amazing voices, including Christina Philippou. Christina is one of the leading experts in the country on football's finance, a lecturer at University of Portsmouth. Joining Christina is Damien Green, an MP for Ashford, and also on the select committee for the DCMS. Alongside Damien is Damien Irvine, who is the CEO of Ebbsfleet United. And for those interested in the crisis in the game, there will also be Dave Kitson, former Reading player, played over 200 odd games in the Premier League, and now a big campaigner for change at the club. So it should be a great night, starting at 6:30. Full details are on our website, www.fairgameuk.org. Hope to see you there. And while you're there, why don't you check out our Support Us tab on the website. That gives you all the kind of latest opportunities to volunteer and help us here at Fair Game, including things like advocacy officer or club engagement officer, and of course, a head of fundraising role. Anyway, so back to the meat of today's podcast.
So, referees, performances and player behaviour. Where to start? Let's begin with the ref. We've seen tremendous progress, of course. England's international against Australia saw a woman referee in charge of the game, for example. But I guess the focus is on what happens week in, week out in our domestic men's football leagues. Add VAR into the mix and the series of errors we've already seen this season, well, what can be done? Keith Hackett, let's start with you. You refereed your first match back in 1960. Now, do you recognise the referees of 2023?
Well, I think I played a major part in the development of referees. Obviously, I was refereeing in the professional area for 23 years. So that covered 10 years of international football. So I guess I've seen referees advance, get fitter. And of course, when I retired from refereeing, I put forward to the Premier League through Sir Dave Richards the need for professional referees. And the reasoning behind that was I was out in New Zealand v Australia. I'd had 17 years with the company as a sales and marketing director when I received a phone call just after officiating this World Cup preliminary game to be informed I'd lost my job through refereeing. And that happened on a couple of occasions, which didn't help my CV. And on one occasion, I had to charter my own aircraft to get back to England, the princely sum of £2,000 to be flown back from Stuttgart, having refereed Stuttgart Feyenoord, in order to get to a board meeting. Had I not attended that board meeting, I was under the threat of losing yet another job. So I think it was important at that stage to move or suggest that with the amount of time required, that we move towards professional refereeing.
But despite that professionalism, the perception today, and perception is so important as we know, the perception is that we appear to have the worst match officials in charge of games than we've ever had before. Is that fair?
Well, I think we've got to put it in perspective. In my day, even with top games, we'd probably have 3 cameras covering the match with a sort of expertise of media broadcasting now. There's a minimum of 22 cameras. And therefore, as a result, there are going to be incidents when the referee doesn't see the incident. If he doesn't see the incident, then he can't make a decision. And of course, the exposure to that comes very much through the television media. So what we need to do is obviously then introduce technology. And if I can just track back a little bit, in my day, we had to try and search out a small rectangular piece of material as a linesman's flag in order to recognize that he was flagging a decision. So again, when I took over the PGMOL role, I decided to introduce communication kits. I wasn't clever. I went to watch a rugby game at Twickenham. I listened into what the referees were saying. I immediately came back to the Premier League and said, we need these. And we introduced them without even asking FIFA or the IFAB, the International Football Association Board. And we brought them on, and they were a pretty huge success from the start. I was also involved with goal line technology, and very much involved in going to the Premier League and saying, I'd like to introduce goal line technology. And this was after watching a game at Old Trafford where Roy Carroll, the Manchester United goalkeeper, dropped the ball over the line. The referee and the assistant referee hadn't got a chance of seeing whether it was over the line or not. I had from the seat in director's box. And from that point, I went in and said, look, we want goal line technology. And just to give you a background, to get that technology working, we have 7 cameras around each goal operating at 50 frames per second. And I knew from my experience with the communication kits that if you send a garbled message or a confused message, you would have a poor outcome. With goal line technology, I said to Hawkeye, Dr. Paul Hawkins, all I want that communication to be is a goal, nothing else. No goal, it's nearly a goal, just a goal. And so we move on to the very hot topic of why referees are seen in a poor light at the moment is because I think they're making a complete and utter shambles of VAR and its operation.
Let's put VAR on ice just for the moment. We'll come back to that. But Niall, I wanted to bring you in here as a fan and a former football club director. Keith has raised that word communication several times in that answer. Do you think one of the things that can help the fans' view, the fans' enjoyment of the game, is to hear what's being said between the officials in the stands amongst the fans? Because the viewers at home can see everything, and yet the people who've paid the money to go into the ground and watch it, they don't know what the hell's going on. And that seems to happen more and more and more and take up more and more time. I mean, do you feel that would be a positive move? And why don't we have it?
I mean, it's impossible to disagree with that, to be honest, Graham. I mean, you know, apart from being a football fan, I'm a quite big rugby fan. And there's when you watch that on the telly and you can hear the conversations between the officials, that makes a huge difference because it's, you know, it does kind of make a bit more clarity. So I think that would be a huge benefit. It's difficult to imagine how that would operate in a stadium because like having that constant, you know, going through the tannoy about what's actually happening, it would only perhaps be on the controversial decisions. Perhaps it would then be played out. It's a great one to talk about, a great one to develop because I think that kind of clarity, what you get in rugby, is a real big benefit. But I think there's an awful lot that football can learn from rugby and how referees are treated and the kind of discipline that you get from there. And that could bring me on to a whole load of other things, Graham. You know, I passionately dislike all the players crowding around referees. I, you know, dislike the kind of play acting that goes in. And this is my big moan. You know, I'd love to see if you're using technology to the level you are, that you basically throw the book at any player that's caught diving or cheating, because that just encourages, you know, kids to start doing that. You see them all kind of throwing themselves on the floor in training nowadays, and it's just like, where have you learned that from? Why is that acceptable? And I'd love to see far more power for referees and for the discipline to really stamp that out. I just find that so irritating, Graham.
Yep.
There's so much more I could do. I could rant on for a long time, Graham, which is undoubtedly this. I love this particular pod because it's given me the freedom to be the fan rather than the CEO, and that's to kind of let everybody know that I'm still a big footy fan and will go most weeks.
Players cheating, it's a big thing nowadays. The odd yellow card is thrust up there, Keith. Are they cheating more now than they used to? I mean, have players changed over the years, and why?
Well, I think a broad brush view is that, I mean, certainly there's no question that acts of simulation, feigning injury, are,
Why
if you
can't
like,
we call it cheating? Why can't we just say cheating?
I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's cheating. Let's make no mistake. There's more cheating goes on now than when I certainly refereed. And I think what we've seen over recent years, I think, is a decline in standards of refereeing. I hate to say that. I think that they've lost some of the required management skills, good communication skills between player and referee, a sort of a good copper approach, that quiet word in the ear. You've done 31 and I've caught you. I'm not going to find you this time, but I will next. And I think that the whole scenario is to actually improve the communication, but I think also for the managers and the players. I mean, we've got to take into account that winning now is at all costs. Manager can lose his job after 5 games if he runs 5 losses. Players come in, there's large squads of top players and they want to play. They want to win because they get big bonuses. And the whole mix comes in of increasing the amount of cheating that takes place. Now, the laws of the game are quite clear, but referees don't apply them as strictly as they could. I mean, Law 12, and not getting too technical, but a yellow card has to be issued to a player who attempts to deceive the referee by either feigning injury or pretending to have been fouled, an act of simulation. We don't see that happen often enough. And I'm one who doesn't want to see a plethora of yellow cards. 11 yellow cards in one game recently, in my opinion, far too much. We want a working environment. We want players to trust referees. Sadly, I think that the standard of behaviour on the football field is that they're failing to recognise that they have a duty to, if you like, entertain the fans and try to stay on the field of play. And the referee's trying to put a balance into that by not issuing too many yellow cards. But the yellow card now means very little. It has no deterrent effect, in my opinion. So my view is that we need, in certain aspects, to be moving to a sin bin, like rugby, again, to say, right, okay, you're not going to behave. I know that the yellow card's not going to have the impact, so go off for 10 minutes. Calm down.
That brings us back to the rule book, doesn't it? I mean, you hinted earlier on that when you were refereeing, you were bending the rules a bit, using your own management skills and not sticking to the letter of the law. Do you think referees should do that more often? If they see something, it may not be absolutely according to the book, but they should go ahead and do it anyway.
I think there's a step management approach, which I learned from many top-class referees, the likes of George Courtney, Jack Taylor, Pat Partridge. I can name them all. And their mode of operation was quite clear. If they'd run alongside a player and you could see an exchange of words, and it wasn't necessarily a threat. It wasn't next time you're going to get a yellow card. It was more or less of, I want you to improve. I want your standard of behaviour to improve. Next step would be, I'm going to bring the captain across and I'm now issuing a public rebuke. And then thirdly, you go into the disciplinary process. Players would respond to that, but I see players now receiving a yellow card. It's almost a badge of honour, and it doesn't get the desired effect that we're all looking for. And then ultimately, when that player gets a red card, if you, Graham, went to a show in London and the lead singer hit a poor note, you wouldn't expect the producer to come on and hook him round the neck with a stick and take him off, and that's the end of what you would see. football at the top level is in the entertainment business. And a good referee will attempt to keep the players on, but he'll also work with players to actually not necessarily issue the threats, but actually get control in the right manner. And I do think some of the skill sets that I learned are probably not cascading down. Maybe that's because of the pressures that's on the referee themselves. But there's no question that when you see what I think is simple decisions, referees getting them wrong, then you can understand that this breaks up, if you like, the respect between player and referee, teams and referee, and managers' behaviour towards referees. I'm not condoning it, but I'm saying that this is one of the factors that doesn't help refereeing.
And it doesn't help the game. I mean, as a professional observer and as a keen fan for more years than I care to remember, it's that consistency of referees that makes my blood pressure rise.
Yes.
Niall, as a fan, as a watcher, I mean, that's it, isn't it? Week in, week out, you see things that are ignored one week, and then we get a red card for them the next week. What do you think, Niall? I mean, it's the most frustrating thing, isn't it?
That's such a problem that you've got, because like what Keith was just saying, you kind of want that level of development of the discipline on the pitch. But the problem is having that consistency of approach, because you can have one referee one week that will be like throwing yellow cards like they're confetti, and the next week nothing happening. So that's one of the hardest things. It can be so frustrating. As a person who, I'm a Wimbledon fan, so I've seen referees in the Premier League and I've seen referees in the Combined Counties League. You know, and the difference is huge, and it varies totally week by week, and it depends on, sometimes like you have a referee that wants to be the centre of attention, and particularly the lower level, because you know they're part of an entertainment business, and that can be so frustrating when you've not got that level of consistency. So, Keith, for me, one of the questions is, while I like the kind of words you're saying, to have that applied consistently across all referees is really difficult. And I come back to some of the things that, for me, it's that level of respect that referees don't get at the moment. I'm also I'm only pro the idea of the sin bin. I'm also pro the idea of the 10-yard extra bit for any when you get a load of players coming up and moaning at a referee. You know, the referees are the people who help the game run. It's not up to captains and players to come and crowd around a referee to argue a decision. The decision's been made. That, for me, is one of the bits that massively frustrates me. And the more we can get that level of respect back into refereeing, hopefully you see the kind of the cheating, and I will call it cheating, kicked out of the game more, because it ruins the spectacle. And as a parent as well, when you start seeing kids replicating and almost admiring the cheating that's going on, it's just like, what is coming into our game?
Can I ask you, have the referees simply become too big for their boots? I mean, for me, what really I don't understand, when I was a younger man, it was the FA Cup final. An honour was for the team managers to lead their sides out at Wembley. It was a huge honour. This was the thing that the managers all wanted. Now, the theatre of Premier League football and other leagues as well, the referees lead the teams out. I mean, that gives them this sense of, you know, we are the stars. We're leading the teams out. They should be out there in the centre circle waiting for the players to come out. They shouldn't be leading the teams out. Who made that decision?
Well, I mean, all that stems from the Premier League, and probably the Premier League trying to make a spectacle of the opening minutes of a game before the whistle's blown for the kickoff.
But what's it got to do with the referee? It's the players.
Well, I don't disagree, because I still take the view that the best referees are the ones that are not seen. I think, getting back to this question of consistency, I get frustrated when I see the Premier League, because I think the truth is, I think there's some referees that have attained the dizzy heights who have shortfalls in capability. I don't think they're good enough. And the reality is that ultimately, at the end of the day, when I look at the structure of the PGMOL, the organisation that is supposed to train, educate and select referees, of which I was a boss for a number of years, we had a situation where we would meet almost on a weekly basis. We would have the big screen in the room, and we would talk through decisions, good, bad, or indifferent. And we would latch on to those good pieces of refereeing that that someone has delivered on that particular Saturday and say, why can't you do the same? Learn from this wonderful piece of refereeing. In the same way, we would ask a referee, and it wasn't an act of shame. We would ask the referee, talk us through that decision. We know the outcome was wrong. We know it was a poor piece of refereeing. Talk us through how you saw that particular incident. How did you make that error? And of course, when you start doing that, you know that very, very clearly there's a process. There's a process that says you see, you recognize, you think, and then you act. And the reality is often you don't see. And that point then brings in the relationship that you have with the assistant referee and the fourth official, and how well they can assist you when you've got a blank spot and not being able to see something. Are they man enough? Are they given sufficient license by you, the referee, to actually come in and say, look, I see that as a foul or whatever? I think that what we've got is, at the moment, we've got a limited number of quality referees. I measure them to the likes of, I've mentioned before, the Courtneys, the Partridges, the Collinas of this world, and say, right, okay, we want to be world-class referees like they are. And if I look at the Premier League at the moment, I think sadly, and I have to say it, the Select Group 1, there's probably 2 referees that are stand out, and they get into trouble also. And they get into trouble because they're lazy. I've quoted this in recent times. I think that what VAR has done, and I was warned, Nigel Owens, the top class rugby union referee, said, look, the danger you've got with VAR is it will promote lazy refereeing. I think he's done that. I see referees hesitating on what is clearly a penalty kick decision. Now, is that fear that they don't want to make an error, or is it that they're waiting for the man in the Stockley Park to make the decision in his ear, and then he gets what he thinks is the right decision? The ultimate role of a referee is make the decision, and then VAR on 4 aspects of criteria to come in and help. And I listened in to a recent show of Howard Webb explaining how the VAR was operating and how the discussion, and we could listen into it. It was a complete and utter garbled mess. There was total lack of clarity. And I just go back to the basic refereeing when I refereed. Would I want someone whispering in my ear as I'm refereeing, it's not a foul, it's play on and all those sort of aspects? No, I don't need a running commentary. What I need is to develop almost a silence, even though I'm in front of 100,000 spectators, so that my concentration is so focused that I make the accurate decisions. So I think where the investment needs to come in by the Football Association is to get back to training and developing referees in a much more systematic way, not to make them manufactured, but to say, look, if that man's from the north and he's a plumber, or he's from the east and he's a policeman, there's different approaches in life. They have a different education background. And if that's David Ellery from Harrow when he was, he's not going to talk like me from South Yorkshire. But the reality is we want to gain and become the best referees in the world. And I think, when we look at the Premier League, Graham, when I left maybe 8-9 years ago, my budget was £5 million, which I always thought was a large amount, and I had to deliver a return on that level of investment. That figure now, at the professional level, is £26 million. So I can't go back in this program and say to you that money is not available to actually train and educate and improve refereeing standards. And when we look at grassroots refereeing, which we've touched on, and I'm heavily involved in a grassroots club and also a league, we look at referees and you think they have the potential to be outstanding referees, but they're left in the wilderness there's 11 levels. In my time, there was class 1, 2, and 3. And when you were class 1 referee, you could referee any match. Now what we've got is we've got 11 levels, which means, for me, that that pathway to the top is more difficult, and the succession planning becomes more difficult. And as a consequence, the referees are lazy and they're comfortable knowing that they're going to get a salary however they perform.
I want to pick you up on VAR in just a moment. Let's bring Niall in on VAR from a fan's point of view. We hate it, don't we? Is that fair? We just hate it. We don't see any progress. We don't see any advantage. We feel it's holding the game back. The gaps in the game, which destroys the momentum. And we're just waiting to see what happens from somebody who's nowhere near the ground. I mean, speak on behalf of the fans now. What do you think of VAR?
It's a weird one, though, because I think I might be a bit of the exception here. I don't mind VAR. What I don't like is the length of time it takes the decision to come through. And equally, when the technology can't be very far away for it all to be automatic. That's the reality. Everybody's going to talk about that. The Liverpool Spurs one, that's the most famous one that's currently everybody's talking about it. It was really obvious. But drawing an electronical line in there on a computer is not actually particularly difficult for having it done there. I mean, it's like it should be an automatic decision. It's almost taken out of the hands of a fourth referee. All they've got to do is press the button to say, run the system now on this particular incident, and that's it, job done. And it should be very quick. I go back to, obviously goal line technology is obvious because that's like the ball's gone over the line. But actually the same kind of technology should be available to look at those kind of more controversial decisions. The bit that I think where VAR can become a little bit difficult is when it comes to simulation and when it comes to diving and when it comes to those slightly more controversial fouls and incidents. That is where it takes too long. I think any offside decision we should be able to almost, I hate to say it, Keith, but you're almost in a situation now where the lino could be almost out of a job because it should be almost automatic. And I think that would be the next potential step. On the controversial fouls and stuff like that, I think it should be left to the referee to make on the decision on the pitch. And if somebody gets caught cheating, then we throw the book at them.
It seems to me to be a Premier League problem, Keith, because we've seen games overseas that have VAR. They seem to operate it much more efficiently, much more quickly, much more accurately than we do over here. We seem to have our own series of problems that are unique to our game. Do you see that?
Yes. Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the thing is, are they overcomplicating it, or are they almost saying to me, to you? I mean, look, my view is that I do generally believe that as I introduced assistant referees, let me clarify that. We had assistant referees, linesmen in my day, who were also refereeing at a lower level. And I decided that, in my wisdom, that the more you do something, the better you become. Graham, you're an international broadcaster. You make it look completely easy because you've done it for a number of years. You know the electronics and various other things. So for me, I introduced the assistant referee role, and that's all they did. They weren't referees at the weekend. They were linesmen. They got better at it. In the same way, in my opinion, you can't have a guy who referees a big game on a Saturday and then on a Sunday at 12 o'clock, he's sat in front of a television screen, maybe with the weight of the world because he's not had a very good performance on the Saturday and he's being hammered by the various television programs. And he's going into that particular environment in the VAR room with baggage. So for me, I think the easy option is that you have a specialist, one who understands the technology of working the screen, looking for the clip, and doing it week in, week out, and trained, almost like a pilot is trained in the simulator before he takes off. Let's get them better trained. Let's sort out the communication mess. At the moment, that referee could be Michael Oliver, regarded as our number one referee. And one day he's referee, and he's got perhaps the new boy on the block in the VAR room. And the VAR room has some hesitancy over a decision, a tight call, and he thinks, well, Michael Oliver's the best referee, he must be right. And Michael Oliver's thinking, I wish the VAR had come in just to clarify that particular decision. So that relationship is a potential problem. So for me, the VAR operation has to be one of a specialist role done week in, week out. That's all they do. They're a VAR specialist. Now we come to the calls, if you like, in relation to the involvement and the mess that they get themselves into. And you know that it's not working in this country. And it's down to competence. It's not the system. The system's the same. And then the other thing that I just want to bring up, because I think it was touched on very, very clearly by Niall, and that is AI, artificial intelligence, coming into the game. It's already there. At the World Cup, they operated a semi-automated offside system. So we're not relying, and I mentioned camera speeds of 500 frames per second. And the reason I mention that is that we're using broadcast speeds to make decisions on offside. And I know that there's built-in inaccuracy. If we move to AI, then we know that there's 19 cameras and there's 69 spots on every player that's playing and the referee involved in the game and the ball. And therefore, you're going to get a more accurate decision that's automatic in terms of the offside position. The match official then, all he has to concentrate on is that player active? Is he interfering with the play, or has he gained an advantage? And where you have the nonsense is the two are not working together at the moment by way of the laws of the game. The IFAB have overcomplicated the offside law. They've made a complete mess of handball, because I can get referees in the room, 100 referees in the room, and I'm not going to get anywhere near 80 or 70 or 60 of them agreeing on that decision. So if referees can't agree, how can we expect fans to be satisfied with the decisions?
Absolutely. One thing I'd introduce straight away is that any VAR must be watched at match speed, at real life speed.
Yes.
To slow it down, I think, gives a completely false impression. But Niall, do you think we should take one job away from the referee to make their life a little bit easier? And I'm talking about timekeeping. Do you think timekeeping should be taken away from the referee so that A, it's more accurate, B, he doesn't have to worry about it, and also it's very much part of this time wasting development that's happened in the game, which drives me up the wall. They're all at it from the second minute sometimes. I mean, would it help to have an independent timekeeper, do you think, on the side?
God, you're making me sound like a complete rugby union fanatic here. I'm going to go for it's the same thing. So I love the 10-yard thing in rugby. But the other thing I also love is the red clock, right? So you've got a timekeeper that's telling you exactly how long is left, and it's visible to the fans throughout the whole time. So if somebody's, then the fans can moan about why isn't the clock being stopped now for this deliberate time wasting or whatever. That for me would be beneficial. I mean, it makes more sense to have a real time element about what your 90 minutes actually is. You can have another clock telling you what time it is, but actually in terms of it's nearly 5 o'clock. And I used to remember when games used to finish at 4:45. That seems like absolutely impossible these days. I would love the idea of having that kind of the red clock, if you like, and it almost to the sense of, I actually also quite like the idea that if the ball's still in play when the clock's run out, that you play until the ball goes out of play.
The rule makers, Keith, it's so slow to change, isn't it? I mean, everybody can see it, but nothing seems ever to happen. I mean, they need to be kicked up the proverbial.
Well, I mean, it took us 6 years to get goal line technology in, and we had the system operating accurately after 1 year. There was just a lack of wanting to change, and I think that there's no question that I've been saying for 10 years now, along with David Dean, and I had a meeting with David, and it is more than 10 years, where I said to him very clearly that we need an independent timekeeper. And we need to take that away from the referee for all the reasons that's been mentioned. Now, when we get to the games, we know full well that those teams that are at the bottom of the league, what they're doing tactically is reducing the amount of actual playing time, because that is reducing the strong opposition being able to score a goal. And that tactic is in play. And I saw that in 1981. I became an international referee. I started refereeing home and away legs of European competitions. And you'd go to the first leg and you suddenly didn't have a game because the opposition were kicking the ball out. The goalkeeper was taking enormous length of time. I was issuing yellow cards. And the old focus then was on at what point are we going to get a reasonable amount of actual playing time?
Why don't the referees take the bull by the horns? Some of the rules are just inconsistent. I was watching. I'm a big Luton fan, and the last home game, 2 Luton players came off for injuries, so they weren't allowed to come back on.
Oh yeah.
So the free kick for the opposition were then attacking 9 men. I mean, it's bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers. Why don't the referees just say, "Well, to hell with the rule book. This makes more sense." And whatever they choose to do then. But they don't seem to have the bottle to do that.
I think that a lot of times it seems to me that Law 18 with modern referees is not applied. And as a result, I think that...
What is Law 18? Law 18 is?
Common sense.
Common sense, that's it.
That's all it is. And it got us over a lot of problems applying it. Now, yeah, I know with the lawmakers, and I know that we have to apply the law, but I can't understand why when a player, and you know, I can remember Arsene Wenger having a conversation with me on this particular subject because he had a player injured. The player who committed the offence was given a yellow card. The player could not be treated on the field of play, so he had to go off. The corner kick was taken, a goal was scored. I was the boss of the PGMOL. I entirely agreed with his sentiment. And I raised this through the FA to the IFAB and got an absolute slapdown, saying, you're the referee and you're the boss of the referees. You referee, we'll deal with the laws. And I'm saying, as a practitioner, for a number of years, 20 odd years then in the game, we needed to make these changes that were not overcomplicated. They were quite simple to actually put into effect. And it's a little bit like the throwing, isn't it? That frustrates people when he's taken from the wrong position.
Always.
And that's referees who are not applying the law that's there. Or, as Niall has already said, this advancement. Let me tell you, a few years ago, we decided that it would be a good idea where dissent was taking place, we would advance the ball. And FIFA came in and said, we'll allow the experiment. It worked brilliantly, as it does in rugby, because rarely do they moan at the referee. As a result, we were advancing and we were sorting the problem out. Then FIFA said, we'll adopt this 2 years later. But they then implied that it had to be a yellow card for that to take place. And of course, it killed it. And they knew what they were doing. So for me, I think there are simple advances in law that could be made that would ease the burden on refereeing.
Yeah, I mean, some countries don't seem to care about the rules. I was reading about a match in Portugal where the referee used the white card for a player went down injured, so the opposition player kicked the ball off and the referee raised a white card. I'm sure that's not in a rule book anywhere, but they just went ahead and did it. We don't seem to be able just to use that common sense rule and go ahead and do it. Send off those players who are cheating and wasting time. Send them off.
Yeah, I think that sometimes we get locked in the laws of the game, and this is how it should be, and this is what it should be, and we take away the approach that we want referees to referee a match. And of course, and I used to say to the top referees when I was their boss, you're refereeing not just a football match, you're actually officiating an event. You're an event manager. And I use that analogy of going to watch a show in London. I would expect everybody to participate in the show on the stage and not to be interfered with it in relation to time or a player, an actor going down or whatever. I think we just have to say that we're in the entertainment business, but at the moment, we're ruining the entertainment for spectators. We're ruining it because players are cheating. We're ruining it because we've got a train to catch, and all of a sudden the referee puts up a board that says 14 minutes, and we went, oh, not another 14 minutes of this hell. Or we've got VAR, and we don't know what's happening. I mean, as a referee with a massive amount of experience, I'd go to a game. I stopped going to Premier League games because I was getting frustrated with the interference of VAR. And people would say to me, what's happening, Keith? And I'd go, I ain't got a clue. It's not because I've not seen it, but I'm thinking, why is VAR coming in? So we've got this overindulgence of VAR. We've got referees relying on VAR and lazy refereeing. And I listened to Nigel Owens explain to me what VAR would do. And he talked about the lazy aspect became the word careless, really. Careless officiating. And he said, look, think of a tightrope walker, the referee. He's got a pole and he's walking across a cavern. And if he falls off, he's dead. In a way, that's refereeing, because let me tell you, that tightrope walker will concentrate and attempt to make every decision accurate. And he would keep his interference level because his concentration was on his next step.
Having said that, Niall, I'm sure you'll agree with me that probably the most common chant we hear at every football ground is, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing. We can't all be wrong. We can't all be wrong.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Niall?
You're right. I mean, it's a very common chant. I think this goes so back towards the respect that we don't have for referees and the culture of that. And that for me is that it is that 10-yard thing. It is, they don't hassle, referees, and that element of going that, referees are going to be making decisions as the game's live on the more, and then we can pull it back. That for me is the issue about it, because we're always going to be on the side of our players, right? We're always going to be on the side of that. So if a bunch of our players all kind of surround a referee, we're going to be yelling at the referee. If one of our players wins a penalty and we kind of half know that they dived a little bit, are we going to be moaning about it? Probably not as much as we should do. Every team will have a player, and I know what Wimbledon do, that is probably renowned for falling over a bit too fast, or like trying to do simulation or whatever. And we shouldn't be going, that's kind of like, that's just the way it is. It shouldn't be like that. It should be like, what the hell is he doing? The guy's a cheat. And the problem is we haven't got that culture. And until we kind of really clamp down on those things that are so frustrating and annoying, Graham, then we're just going to be creating that culture that makes it so much more difficult to be a referee. I mean, God knows, Keith, how you ever managed to do it, because it just seemed to be like a completely thankless task of having, I mean, I'm only a Wimbledon fan, so it's like 6,000-7,000 people barracking you. But like, I can't imagine what that'd be like at a packed Anfield or whatever, when you've got 45,000-50,000 people barracking you and saying you don't know what you're doing. I mean, like, this is your job. So I think we should be in a situation where we've got to bring that respect up, so it's fine and we can all go, of course he knows what he's doing. He's doing a better job than I would be, which is almost certainly going to be the case.
I just wanted to pick you up on that frustrated word that Niall just used. You've talked about your frustration at watching Premier League games. You've discussed, what you feel needs to come into the game. As we close, are you optimistic about the future? Do you see it progressing in the right way, despite all these problems and frustrations and tribulations?
I think we'll always have difficulties within refereeing in terms of the very nature of the game. And I hope that Howard Webb will get to grip as a top-class referee and a good communicator. But I think he needs to put a good team around him in relation to his management and coaching setup. You can't go every week apologising to the manager that you've made another clanger. What you've got to do is learn from the error and move on. And I think that what you need to have is a good succession plan. You need to roll that plan out very carefully to ensure that the person involved is fully trained. Look, when I refereed, I had no support. I did it on my own. And like any other referee, when we introduced professional refereeing, so I brought in sports psychologists, sports nutritionists, a performance assessment system that analysed the distance, the speeds, just like a manager of a football club. And I think that we've just got into the realms of forgetting that we've got a job to do, and it is a job, and having pride in trying to perform at the very top level. And then understanding the laws and how they're interpreted. And like I've said, that I know in Portugal they'll have their referees together. They'll look at aspects and they'll say, "This is what we're going to do." They have the compendium of the laws, but they then say what's good for the game. And we need to get back to that system. But at the same time, we need to understand that when we look at an incident like the Liverpool, where a goal is chalked off and it's wrong, and they say we've got it wrong, but then they come out and defend it. I'm stood there wanting to smash the screen because of a lack of law knowledge. Because basic law says this, that if there is a serious, with VAR, if there is a serious missed incident, right, the game can be stopped.
Ah.
And that's in the VAR protocol.
And nobody knew that. Nobody has ever brought that up.
Well, they should do. They're practitioners of the law, And if they're not actually studying the law on a regular basis through communication, through meetings and all that goes through, then we're not going to advance refereeing, and we're going to have very similar problems. I'm optimistic because when I go and watch Penistone Church, who are way down in the Steps division, and it's only called church because it plays on designated church property. When we actually look at that team, we have variable referees coming in, youngsters, who in the main are officiating extremely well. So I know the talent is there. But the whole system that the FA operates is too many fences to climb over and aspirations curtailed, where somebody looks and you get a very top referee like Michael Oliver, 8 years apprenticeship to get anywhere near the Football League. I was 12 years. And there were colleagues who I thought were better referees in my era, around the same age as me, who dropped out. Now, I think that if you look at all the TV reality programs, I'd like to see a TV show that says we're going to grab half a dozen players who have been thrown out of the academy because they're not good enough, if that's somebody's view. And television should say, let's get these guys and train them to become referees.
Well, there you go. Now, there's a thought. There's an idea for a new program. Excellent. And there was positivity in the answer as well. Keith and Niall, thank you so much for your time. If you've enjoyed it, do please subscribe to the Fair Game podcast. You can find it on all the usual channels. I'm Graham Miller. The producer is Ian Beach. Thank you for listening. And until the next edition of We Love You Football, it's goodbye for now.